years ago, a YouTuber by the name CC West uploaded the video Mabel is Terrible. It was a video essay about why he felt the Gravity Falls character Mabel Pines was not a good person. A little over a year later, I made a response to this video which I was pretty happy with overall. But because CC West's original video had a pretty positive reaction to it, I was expecting a bit of a backlash, but I'm happy to say most of the comments I got were pretty nice. There were, however, a few criticisms of the video that I'd like to address now. First of all, I had to disable the comments on the first part due to getting a lot of dismissive comments that offered no real insight into why they didn't agree with what I had to say. And after a while, I just got a bit tired of reading them. Now that I think about it, why did I split my reaction into two parts? I think maybe it was something to do with Firefox not letting me upload videos over 15 minutes long. Well, I use Chrome now, so I should be okay. But anyway, I got some more insightful counter-arguments on the second part, so let's try and address them. The main thing people took issue with was me suggesting Dipper was at fault for being the one to trigger the trap into the bunker, when Mabel was the one that pushed him into the switch. I claimed that Mabel wasn't at fault for Dipper being clumsy, but some have suggested that she should have known he was clumsy, and also pointed out that Dipper couldn't have known that the switch was there. So I'll retract this statement slightly by saying no one is really at fault here. It was just one of those things. Mabel didn't know Dipper would stumble forward like that. Dipper didn't know Mabel would hit him on the back, and neither of them knew the switch was there. The other common rebuttal I get is that I'm using the same argument over and over, that Mabel's actions are there to serve the plot. Firstly, I don't really see what's wrong with using the same argument, and I would certainly maintain that furthering the plot is a perfectly valid reason for a character doing things. Everything a fictional character does is deliberately put in there for the purpose of advancing or enhancing the story and characters in some way. Characters in fiction don't exist to be your friend. They exist to enhance your experience of a story. For this reason, you need to judge their actions differently from how you would judge the actions of a real person. If a real person hurt a person's feelings by saying they weren't manly and convinced them to go off, learn about what it really means to be considered manly, and that it's actually more important to just be yourself and not really care what others think, you would probably still be justified in thinking they weren't very nice. If a fictional character does this, it's clearly been inserted in there to set the plot in motion, and without it, there is no story. So I don't really think it makes sense to have an issue with them doing it. Fictional characters need to have flaws. They need to do bad things sometimes. They need to have disagreements and conflicts with one another. You can't have a story with believable and interesting characters without those things. Also, and maybe this is just me, but I'm actually not as bothered if what a person that isn't real is doing is good or bad, if I find it entertaining to watch. The scene where she possesses Zeus, for example. Maybe it's not something she really needs to do at this time, but goddammit, it's a hilarious scene and it's not real. So does that really matter? Now, you may be wondering if CC West ever responded to my video. Well, I'm sad to say he didn't. I left numerous comments on his video informing him that I had made a response to his video, but I never heard back from him. I have no idea if he's even seen my videos. He does seem to be doing pretty well for himself as a YouTuber, clearly focusing on quality over quantity with, holy cow, only 11 videos at the time I'm writing this and over 20k subs. That's impressive, especially given YouTube's algorithm basically requires you to post at least one video a week to maintain an audience now. So good for him. Now let's talk about the main reason I made this video. CC West's follow-up video titled Mabel is Terrible 2, The Apology. The opening is basically him repeating the disclaimer he had at the start of the first video, that he loves the show and that he wouldn't make critical analysis of it if he didn't, which I completely agree with. He also mentions that people have told him Mabel apologizes in the graphic novel, so he's going to talk about that too. Cool. He goes back over a couple of points he made in the original video and admits to being too harsh on Mabel about testing Dipper and not breaking up with Gideon. He's more or less just repeating what I said in my response, just in his own words, so there isn't really anything I need to say in response to this. Also talks about the time traveler's pig and how Dipper was kind of in the wrong for wanting to stop Wendy from going out with Robbie, which I kind of agree with, but the show does address that in Boys Crazy. After Dipper successfully convinces Wendy to break up with Robbie, he immediately goes to her and suggests they hang out, which Wendy rightfully rejects because she's still upset about what Robbie did, showing that while Dipper may have done a good thing, he did it for selfish reasons. Robbie may have been a jerk, but deep down that's not really the reason Dipper wanted Wendy to break up with him. This is the key thing to judging the actions of a fictional character. It's not really about what they do, it's about why they did it. If a fictional character has good intentions behind what they are doing, I will always get behind it. Interestingly, CC West also mentions that the reason he didn't talk about Dipper's wrongdoings in the episode was because it was a video about Mabel and not Dipper. I'm sorry, but that's not a legitimate excuse, mate. First of all, it's your video. You can make it about whatever you want. But more to the point, Dipper's role in the episode and the question of if he is in the wrong as well is relevant to your point about Mabel's actions. This kind of emphasizes a big problem I had with CC West's original video. He seems to gloss over the role other characters play in some of the events he talks about. And apparently the reason why he did this is just because the video isn't about them? No, I'm sorry, but I can't accept that as an excuse. If you are going to properly analyze a character's actions, question their motivation for them, how good or bad they were, and what they mean for the character overall, the role other characters play is an important factor you need to take into consideration. He next talks about sock opera and acknowledges that Dipper was at fault for trusting Bill, but still blames Mabel for convincing him to stop looking at the laptop for a few days, as if Mabel could have possibly known what Bill was planning. He also claims that Mabel only helped return things to the way they were, or saved him as I would prefer to phrase it, once again ignoring how grateful Mabel was to him for agreeing to do the puppet show, saying, "Yes, thank you. This guy, he's number one," and the line said before that, "If you help me with this for just a couple of days, I promise I'll help you with the password." He also for some reason blames Mabel for them losing the laptop. His main gripe seems to be that Dipper sacrifices a lot more than Mabel does. And yeah, I guess he does. So, does the show ever try to claim that Dipper and Mabel are basically even after the events of sock opera? I don't think so. Dipper just happens to be a very generous and caring character towards his sister, and Mabel has always shown appreciation for that. Why exactly does she need to sacrifice a bunch of stuff in return? What's the point? If anything, that makes Dipper seem far less caring towards her. How selfless can an act of kindness be if you expect something in return for it? He talks about the awakening segment of Little Gift Shop of Horrors, where Mabel convinces Waddles to give up being a pig version of Neil deGrasse Tyson by pointing out he's forgotten who he is. But he only mentions part of one line from her about how he needs to help her as well, and ignores Waddles saying, "What good is helping the world if I can't help my favourite person in the world?" Once again, glossing over important details that make Mabel's actions far more understandable. But he does make an interesting point that the story is kind of foreshadowing Mabel being upset about Dipper taking Ford's apprenticeship, once again ignoring the other things Mabel had been through that day, and Stan pointing out that at least she will still have Dipper, as well as her saying later that she's okay with Dipper taking the apprenticeship. He also asks an odd question about if we need any more proof the events of a fictional show were planned out and intentional. Yeah, CC West, I'm pretty sure the events in all works of fiction are intentional. He also suggests that they were trying to make Mabel look like the bad guy, which I guess it kind of does when you overlook a lot of important details like CC West does. A more general point follows about how Mabel does things of her own accord without seeing if others are okay with it, which seems like a fairly standard thing for a protagonist in a story to do. Ever seen any crime drama that focuses on a cop that doesn't play by the rules? Writers love to make the main character the lone wolf, so to speak. We know what they are doing is the right thing to do, even if other characters don't think so. We know that the end goal of what they are doing justifies the questionable way they are trying to get to it. I think Walter White sums it up quite well when he says, "I've done a terrible thing, but I did it for a good reason." He also seems to think that this is more proof that there is some kind of intention behind making her seem bad. I mean, if getting Stan to admit to doing a bad thing and making two people happier by getting them to fall in love makes a character seem bad to you, then I guess I can understand that, but personally I don't really see how those things are bad. He then asks what the moral of the love god is, suggesting it might be that it's okay to mess with free will if you achieve something, make people happier, and it's the good guys doing it for good reasons. I mean, he phrases it differently, but that's basically what he's suggesting. And yeah, I'd say that's pretty much it. I don't really see what his issue is. It seems like the problem for him centers around the idea that Robbie and Tambry are no longer themselves when they take the love potion, and they remain that way for the rest of the series. But I always assumed they were still themselves, just with an attraction to one another inserted into their minds. I thought of it kind of like the film Inception. Mabel has inserted the idea of them wanting to be with one another in a way that makes them think it's something they just naturally feel. Also, he is once again ignoring a couple of important lines here. The first is Robbie saying to Mabel, "I've been so miserable since Wendy broke up with me, and I thought my life was over. But you were right. I just needed to move on. I'm happy." And Mabel's justification for not using the antidote: "Every time we play with people's fates, it only makes things worse." He then repeats his point about the Scansion candidate from his original video, but this time also acknowledging Dipper and Ford's involvement. Apparently he has a real issue with mind control, even if it's done for a good reason. Apparently to him, using the same tool as the antagonist, regardless of how or why you are using it, makes you just as bad as the antagonist, which makes no sense at all. I mean, think about it. In a war, let's take the First World War as an example, both sides were doing similar things. They both had armies of soldiers in trenches, and they were both trying to kill each other with guns. But their reasons for doing this were very different, which is why they were even fighting each other in the first place. Maybe this is easier to understand if I use examples that also involve mind control. In the last Harry Potter book, Harry uses the Imperius Curse on an innocent goblin to break into the bank, and later in the book, he uses it again on another wizard, which strictly speaking means he should be serving a life sentence in Azkaban. But if you've read the books, you'd know the reasons why he's doing this make this completely understandable. In the Oddworld video games, the player's character Abe regularly takes possession of enemies called Sligs and kills them by making them explode, laughing about it afterwards. But if you've played the game, you know that he has to do this in order for him and his fellow workers to be free. The reasons for characters doing things are far more important than what they are doing. To be fair, he mentions that they do this before they know the reason Bud is running for mayor, so this would suggest that he's okay with their reasons for doing this. He just takes issue with these reasons not becoming clear until later. But Dipper does say right at the start, "I've got a really bad feeling about Bud Cleefel as mayor." He then talks about Bill tricking Mabel in Dipper and Mabel vs. the Future, and how Mabel agrees to Bill disguised as Blendin's proposal of a time bubble that stops time from going forward. And he talks about how this is kind of a selfish act on Mabel's part because of how it could affect Dipper, her friends, and family back home, and the other residents of Gravity Falls. This is an interesting point, but there are a few things to keep in mind. Mabel is an emotional wreck at this point, who wants nothing more than summer to last forever. Bill has deliberately targeted her at this moment when she is the most vulnerable. She's not going to be thinking straight or wondering how Blendin's proposal might affect others. Bill as Blendin never mentioned exactly how this time bubble could affect others, or if it affected them at all, so maybe Mabel just assumed it wouldn't. Lastly, he says that summer in Gravity Falls can last as long as you want it to, which kind of suggests that Mabel can choose to make life return to normal whenever she wants. So if this time bubble was affecting others, there were probably things she could have done about that. Heck, she mentions in the graphic novel that she was only trying to get one more day of summer. He also asks if the fact Bill wasn't actually ever going to do this makes it any less shameful. Probably not, but I think the emotional state she was in, and the fact she probably wasn't thinking about the finer details of this agreement at the time, probably do make this a lot more understandable. Now we get into the graphic novel, which I'm happy that he recommended people read for themselves before he talks about it. He skips right to the end of the third story, Don't Dimension It, where she says she's sorry for being selfish during the summer. He says he doesn't think this is a sufficient apology, which is odd, because in his original video, he talks about how he watched the finale multiple times just to see if she ever verbalizes the words, "I'm sorry." And yet she does that here, and it's apparently still not good enough. He mentions how it doesn't work as an apology for her actions in Into the Bunker. Maybe not, but do you think maybe her actual apology in that episode was? He also mentions her actions in Weirdmageddon 2 Escape from Reality and allowing Bill to trick her, which I would argue the awkward sibling hug serves as the apology for. He doesn't really explain why he doesn't think this apology is enough. Maybe this is because the commenters on his video builds it up as this big thing, and then it turned out to just be 6 panels at the end of one of the stories. He was just expecting it to be longer or play a bigger role in the story. For me, the more important thing with any apology is how genuine it seems. If the person is only saying it because they've been told to, then they're not really sorry. Mabel's apology comes at the end of an adventure where she's literally been able to watch herself and see the flaws in her personality. She tells him she's going to change and has a new journal for him. I'm not sure what more he needed, but as someone who never felt like an apology was needed in the first place, I guess it's hard for me to say if it was really enough, but it certainly seemed very genuine. What more does any apology need other than confirmation that the person is genuinely sorry? He then talks about how the show doesn't acknowledge a lot of the bad things Mabel did, namely mind control, which I've already mentioned is kind of okay because they did it for a good reason, creating Dippy Fresh, which was supposed to be seen as a bad thing from the moment he's introduced, and causing Weirdmageddon, which I've already been over. He mentions how there isn't really a reason for the way she behaves beyond her being sad. I'm not quite sure what he's referring to at this point, and he doesn't go into any more detail, so I think I'll just have to ignore this point. He claims her apology in the graphic novel doesn't mean anything, but again, that's all he says about this. I've already been over why the apology seemed pretty meaningful to me, so I guess I'll just have to agree to disagree with him there. He talks about how she didn't sacrifice anything or do anything hard, and personally I just don't think that's true. Next, he talks about how the show plays up Mabel as a good person, even though he personally doesn't see it that way. About how he really wanted the show to acknowledge and redeem the bad things Mabel does. He then makes an interesting point that he feels they basically did that with Pacifica, which apparently made her one of the show's most loved characters. I wasn't aware that everyone loved Pacifica, but okay. I mean, I liked the tender moments of bonding she had with Dipper, but what exactly was it about those stories that made people think she was such a great character suddenly? This is actually a thing I noticed from some of the comments on CC West's first video. Pacifica does seem to be a way more popular character than I would have ever imagined. I mean, the redemption arc for her character for what it was nice, but she really only got one episode and one story in the graphic novel. Outside of that, she's a pretty terrible character that doesn't have anything like the same kind of dimension or compelling presence on screen that Mabel does. Now don't get me wrong, I don't think she's a bad character. I just don't understand why everybody fell in love with her because of one episode. Maybe it's the enemy of your enemy is your friend logic. Pacifica is Mabel's rival, so the fans that don't like Mabel naturally warm to Pacifica more. But I'm happy to say he does attempt to explain what's so great about Pacifica. Apparently it's all about the last few minutes of one episode. Seems a bit weak to condense an entire redemption arc into the last few minutes of one episode, but okay.
Acknowledge, explain, apologize, sacrifice, redemption, enjoy. The writing acknowledges Pacifica's awful behavior, with Dipper confronting her about how she tricked him into ghost-busting a curse that her family deserved and could have easily dispelled on their own by being better people.
It always seemed to me like they were acknowledging how awful Pacifica's family was, not Pacifica herself. There are a number of other episodes where she's pretty awful to Mabel, and nothing is said about it.
The writing explains her actions by showing that even though she feels guilty about what she's done, her awful parents have psychologically conditioned her into obedience.
They certainly do explain and therefore justify her actions, but as I've already explained, they kind of do that for Mabel too. You just glossed over a lot of important lines where this is done.
The writing has her apologize in a way that actually means something by quite literally having her admit to and apologize for specifically what he's accusing her of, and in the heat of the confrontation, and then again later after the ghost outbreak. Also keep in mind that this apology carries a lot more weight because Pacifica hasn't had to apologize over and over and over after every episode. It's a rare occurrence, unlike with Mabel.
She does say sorry at one point in the episode, but it's followed immediately by her claiming her parents made her do it. So it's kind of a backhanded apology. CC West claims it actually means something, which I would argue it does for Mabel as well. He also claims she does it again later, but I've checked and she doesn't say sorry in that scene. So he must mean that it's implied she's sorry in that scene. So it's okay for Pacifica to hint at an apology without actually saying sorry, but it's not okay for Mabel to do the same thing. He also makes an odd claim that this apology, where the word sorry isn't actually said, carries a lot more weight because she's done less wrong things up to that point. So the apology that doesn't feature the words "I'm sorry" means more because it's regarding less bad things? Huh?
The writing actually has her selflessly sacrificing something that means quite a lot to her, the respect of her parents and the reputation of her family, by committing the redeeming action of opening the party to everyone.
Her sacrifice and redemption is apparently her disobeying her parents, who she was already getting sick of at the start of the episode. And I don't really understand Preston Northwest's logic here. He'd rather the mansion burn and everyone stay as wood than the people in the town see them. I mean, you're hiding in a panic room. Are you just going to stay there for the rest of your lives?
And then finally, the writing lets us enjoy her by giving her this really sweet moment with Dipper and having her commit to her newfound position against the control of her parents by tarnishing the rug that previously she was afraid to step on.
There is kind of a redemption arc with her making a mess of the rug and then immediately going to find someone to clean it up. He also claims that he enjoys the character because she got to have this cute scene with Dipper. Wait, hold on. You're saying you enjoyed this character because she had a cute scene with Dipper? Are you trolling us right now, CC West? How many fucking adorable scenes have Dipper and Mabel had together? I mean, it's nice for what it is, but comparing this to Mabel's arc over 2 seasons is like comparing a Tiger Wrist game to Fortnite or GTA 5. They're on a completely different scale. I don't really understand how a few minutes at the end of an episode can suddenly make a character great, but at the same time you're dismissing similar events or actions in other episodes or the graphic novel because they just weren't enough for you? That seems like a bit of a double standard to me. I made a vlog for this episode when it had first come out, which I went back and rewatched to remind myself of what I thought of this episode at the time that it aired. And the funny thing is, I kind of assumed this episode was just the starting point for Pacifica's arc. I even used the phrase baby steps to describe it. And obviously, there are the signs that, this is just a sort of starting point for her with her, them making a mess of that carpet and Pacifica saying afterwards, but seriously, I've got to get someone to clean this up. And similar thing with the hug earlier on. She's like, I'll pay someone to, or I'll pay you to make sure you don't tell anyone that happened. She's sort of on the path to becoming a better person, but it's sort of baby steps kind of thing. It's just going a little bit at a time. So I like that they're reminding us that this doesn't sort of solve everything. This isn't like just a happy ending for her. This is just the sort of first step. Man, that does make me sad now. There was so much potential for further stories with this character, and in the end, all we got was this one short story in the graphic novel. Oddly enough, CC West doesn't even talk about the short story in his video. For me though, Pacifica Northwest represents a lot of wasted potential. It just seemed like the writers didn't know what to do with her a lot of the time. I think her role in the symbol wheel kind of sums up how little thought went into her character. Most of the characters had been wearing their symbols since the first episode they were in, but with Pacifica, they just threw that llama sweater on her in the final episode and left it there. I'm also not the biggest fan of basically making her Dipper's unofficial romantic partner. I mean, I like that they didn't make it canon. They knew that all they had to do was drop little seeds of it as a possibility and just let the fandom take it from there. On the other hand, Dipper already has a romantic interest. Does he really need another? And I just found the idea of her rivalry with Mabel evolving into friendship a lot more interesting. I think the fact they switched her role from Mabel's rival to Dipper's love interest partway through season 2 kind of shows they didn't really know what to do with her. He then claims Gideon had a similar redemption arc in the final episode and wonders why they could do redemption arcs for these two but not Mabel. I think ultimately it boils down to not feeling like Mabel needed to be redeemed, or that her redemption came in the form of her understanding the bad things she did and fixing them at the same time. He then talks about how disappointed he was that the show didn't attempt to redeem her by pointing out how many people she's wronged. But personally, I would argue that the fact that she was able to save the town is enough to say that she's been redeemed. He claims that the apology in the graphic novel was generic and unmeaningful, which was apparently not enough for him. I'm not sure what the apology being generic has to do with anything, but I've already been over why it certainly felt very meaningful. If it wasn't enough for you personally, I guess that's a shame, but I don't really see what more you wanted. I guess the reason he brings up Pacifica's redemption is to suggest they should have done something like that for Mabel. But wasn't that kind of what we got at the end of Weirdmageddon 2 Escape from Reality? He closes things out by calling out the writers for not doing something like this in the finale. He claims Mabel has this dark side there that I guess he can't overlook and has to focus on as a failing of the show as a whole, which we can't pretend hasn't happened. No, we certainly can't pretend it hasn't, but I think I've made a pretty good case that it actually hasn't in this video. I know I'm kind of blowing my own horn there, but I still really just don't understand his line of thinking about Mabel after this video. In fact, if anything, I understand it even less now because he talks about how perfectly okay he was with Pacifica's minimal character arc in half of an episode, but also dismisses an apology at the end of the story in the graphic novel that was entirely about Mabel's character because it was apparently not enough. Some sort of suggestion as to what he wanted in the finale would have been nice.